Welcome to Real Foot Forward, a West Tennessee podcast from Discovery Park of America in Union City, Tennessee. Today's episode is brought to you by Vaughn Electric Company.
Thank you, Zach, and welcome everybody to Real Foot Forward, a West Tennessee podcast where we explore the history, the people, and the culture of our home here in West Tennessee. I'm your host, Scott Williams. Okay, Zach, before we get to our special Elvis Week episode guests, what is something you discovered this week at Discovery Park of America?
Well, in honor of The Last Train to Memphis, one of the most popular books about today's guest, my discovery this week had to be the beautiful restoration work that was done on the trains here at Discovery Park. The 1913 steam locomotive, the coal tender, and more got a full makeover and paint job. They're truly amazing, and I can't wait for our guests to see them.
What a great tie-in. I was wondering where you were going to go. I did not know. I was thinking maybe music, since it's the Elvis week. But Last Train to Memphis was the precursor to Careless Love, both written by our incredibly talented author who is our guest today. About Last Train to Memphis, you might not know this, Bob Dylan said Peter Guralnick's book, Last Train to Memphis, cancels out all others.
Wow.
Meaning that if you want to know about Elvis, these are the two books that you need to read. So it is so thrilling to me to have this year's Elvis Week episode guests, Peter Guralnick, acclaimed music critic, author, and screenwriter specializing in the history of early rock and roll, blues, country, and soul, especially here in the American South. Is that a good summary of who you are and what you do?
Sure, I like that. I don't like summaries generally, but that's a good summary.
Okay, good.
And it's good to be back with you.
It's great to see you again. We're going to talk a little bit about your Colonel Parker book because, as you and I were talking before Zach hit the record button, sometime between 2000 and 2012, you and I were in an elevator together at the Peabody Hotel, and I said, what I'm looking forward to most is your Colonel Parker book. And here it is, many, many years later, and it's out, and people are raving about it. It's changing perceptions of Colonel Parker.
I hope so. I mean, one hopes at least that people will keep an open mind, but I have to say that the book goes back way before you and I, talked about it in the elevator at the Peabody, because it goes back 30 years to when Jack Soden, who was CEO of Elvis Presley Enterprises then and is still at Graceland, invited me in to view the archives after 5 fruitless years of asking him if I could just...
Right. So, funny. So we started the Elvis Collectors Club or the Elvis Insiders, and we were always looking for content, any kind of video, anything that people haven't seen before. And Jack pulled out for us the video. Jack, and I know you know Angie Marghese well.
Yeah, sure.
They pulled out the footage of when they first took over Colonel Parker's collection.
You mean with all the 18-wheelers or the however many wheelers there were, and the cars, and I was there before that happened, just a little while before, when I came in to sort of inventory. Todd was there, Shelley Ritter was there, and by happenstance I was in there working on my Elvis biography, and we all met out at Opryland, and they were telling me about it. And invited me out the next morning to do something, but I didn't go. I mean, I was, I had an interview scheduled or something, but it was so cool to sort of be in on, the beginning. But Jack does not get Jack Soden does not get the credit that he deserves, and he was brilliant in his foresight and his prescience in recognizing that Colonel Parker's collection was not just a treasury of Elvis memorabilia. It's worthy of any collection of 20th century American entertainment. And I mean, it's a Smithsonian type of collection, and it still hasn't been fully cataloged, I think, even though Angie has done an amazing job.
Yeah, it's fascinating how much stuff there is that still could be cataloged. And, they've got warehouses full of amazing things that every time I would go over there, you get chills when you start going through this stuff. What's something that you found when you were going through the collection of Colonel Parker memorabilia? What's something you found that really made your light bulbs go off?
Well, yeah, there are two ways to answer. There are probably a dozen ways, but I should say I was mad at Angie when I went to the Colonel exhibit at Graceland, which is phenomenal. It just opened, and she just did an amazing job, and it's a wonderful collection. But there in the middle of it is one of Colonel's typewriters. I'd say it was his office, and I said to Angie way back, I said, "Do you happen to have one of Colonel's typewriters? It would be so great to have a picture of it in the book." And she said, "No, we can't." Well, she wound up finding it in some obscure, borough or, just, I mean, she had a good explanation. I take it for, but no, as far as my discoveries went, in general, I mean, I'll just tell you about my introduction to Colonel's collection, which Graceland Elvis Presley Enterprise had bought 3 or 4 years earlier due to Jack's recognition of its historical importance. And I, in 1995, just after Last Train had been published, Jack Soden called me up and said, well, essentially he called me up, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the shoulder or anything, but he, he just said how much reading the book had meant to him, reading Last Train to Memphis, and how it reflected on the job that he was doing and was trying to do, yes, aspire to do, and the job that we can recognize historically that he has done, a great job. But he said, after reading that book, I believe if you were to ask me the same question you have asked me repeatedly over the last 5 years while I was writing Last Train, you'd get a different answer. So the question was, can I have access to, to the collection? Which essentially was Colonel Parker's collection. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of Elvis stuff there, but in terms of documents, in terms of correspondence, it was really all Colonel stuff. And so I asked the question, and he said yes. So my wife Alexandra and I went down there. I know you've met Alexandra, and we went down to Memphis, and we entered the warehouse where Colonel's collection was housed. This vast cavernous warehouse with the same dented file cabinets in which Colonel's papers had sat all those years in his office in Madison, Tennessee, and these traveling trunks which went back and forth across the country. It was very well ordered. Just I didn't know the order. We didn't know the order. But in terms of discovery, it was like Alexander and I naturally started in different places. You don't want to be looking over somebody's shoulder while you're trying to discover something. And she would call to me, Alexandra would call to me and say, "You've got to see this." It would be a letter. I mean, there were gas receipts. I mean, the Colonel kept scrapbooks of every performance that Elvis had ever given. Unfortunately, his staff, which was made up of two of Tom Diskin's sisters and a woman named Clanny Williams, whose daughter Brenda was a tremendous source for this book because she was virtually an adoptive daughter to Colonel. They lived right around the corner from Colonel in Madison. But so there were all these things, but it was the letters that captured our attention. And basically, I can't tell you one letter because I had known Colonel, this was 95, and I had met him, well, I'd met him in 88, but let's say I'd known him for about 6 years at that point. And I'd been corresponding with him during that time, and the correspondence was just wonderful. I can't say it was a compliment to the relationship. It was the relationship, and I would throw out these things, and he would just volley them right back, and or hit a passing shot that went right by me. I mean, he was so far ahead of me. But it was so enjoyable. It was such a pleasure to cover because he was so bright, he was so funny, and he was so on top of things. But these letters were a completely different picture, a picture of an entirely different Colonel Parker than I had ever read about, than I had corresponded with, because they were in such depth about familiar events, about familiar scenes, and yet it was as if you were looking at things from the other side of the mirror. But you say, if I were to isolate one thing that we discovered, well, there were a number of things. But when we were up in Vernon Presley's office, which they had to break into, nobody had, it was all padlocked, and it was on the tour, and the people would look at it from the outside, but they had to break into it. And And so we got into that. And while we're going through things there, and there were amazing things there, I'm not sure if this is where we discovered it, but I mean, like letters or postcards from Vernon in prison. Up until that time, I didn't know to what extent Vernon or Gladys were literate, because I would ask people, they had grown up under very poor circumstances, and I honestly didn't know anyway. They were quite literate. I mean, they could write good letters, but here were the things, postcards or letters from Vernon in prison saying, "How's the boy doing?" But then the other thing is, Alexander calls to me and says, "Well, Peter, you've got to see this." And I go over, and there's the letter I originally wrote to Elvis in 67 or 68. I had done 2 articles in the Boston Phoenix. The first was about the 3 singles he put out in 67, which were really a return to the kind of music that he had made so thrillingly and so effectively over the years. I mean, they were blues, basically. And then the second one was after the 68 special, which, I had reviewed that in Boston Phoenix. And I wrote him these letters saying, I know you don't do interviews, but I'm not interested in talking about, personalities. I don't want gossip. I don't want anything. I just want to talk to you about the music. And there was my letter in Vernon's office.
That's crazy. Isn't that crazy?
It was crazy. And then the reply was, the reply that I got was a Christmas card from, you tell me that it's not 3174. What was the address on Highway 51 South? But
I can't remember.
3152, 31.
Yeah.
And I continued to get Christmas cards for quite a few years after that. But the highlight of that has nothing to do with what we found in the middle of our explorations and peregrinations and whatever they were. The phone rang in Vernon's office, which had probably been disconnected 20 years earlier. I can't remember if we picked it up or not, but I thought, okay, we're either doing something very good or very bad, but somebody is on the line.
That's so funny. That, one time, Jen Swearingen, who works there in marketing. So Jen and I got an old radio for a set for a commercial we were doing. We just bought something on eBay. We plugged it in and we twisted the dial, and you could hear a little bit of fuzz. And then all of a sudden, I swear, no one believes this, but I swear to you, only Jen and I were there, but you could hear Elvis singing on the radio, Elvis Presley singing on the radio for about 20 seconds, and then it faded out and no more music.
Well, I'll tell you something else we found, and maybe this was, I'm sure that Ernst Jorgensen found this, or we found these tapes, or at least they went to Ernst, and they were tapes of the Presley family singing. Elvis, Vernon, and Gladys. And I would say Gladys playing the piano. And the astonishing thing about that, and again, I don't know if it's been released. I don't know if my memory is perfectly, totally accurate. But the astonishing thing was, in everything I had ever heard or read, everything anyone ever said, Gladys was the one who had the musical ability. I would ask people if Vernon sang. I mean, you ask people questions, and they may not be the questions. People have they're great. People have their own memories, and they answer honestly. And I've never met a person, maybe one or two, but almost never met a person who was not anxious to talk about what they do honestly and, how they do it. But I'd asked about Vernon, did he have musical ability? Nobody had ever, well, I don't know. On this tape, and I hope I'm not wrong, but I don't think I am, and when we listen to it later, Vernon's voice sounded virtually identical to Elvis's. Gladys, on the other hand, who must have been playing the piano, if I had sat down and played the piano, I think I could have done almost as well. And her voice was enthusiastic, but I wouldn't go beyond that. So it was a totally weird kind of discovery, and yet clearly they were all musical in the sense that they all appreciated music. They had gone around as a trio to these revival meetings when Elvis was a little boy. So I didn't have any question about that, but it was a fascinating find, and I don't know if it's ever been released or not.
Yeah, that's interesting. If it has been, it wasn't while I was there. It wasn't in the 12 years, because I would have remembered that. And for listeners who don't know, in addition to many, many, many other fantastic books, you wrote the biography of Sam Phillips, and also the 2-volume book on Elvis Presley, two books, Last Train to Memphis and Careless Love.
Yeah, but don't forget Sam Cooke, too, because for a while it looked like everybody I wrote about was going to be named Sam.
That's right. And so anytime people tell me that people who discover Elvis or people who are interested, I tell them to get your two books.
Oh, thanks.
Because that is really the way to discover really the true Elvis. Is that when you first bumped up against the concept of Colonel Parker as the manager and started getting really curious, or had you always been curious?
Well, I'd always been curious, but Colonel Parker was part of the story. And to the best of my ability, I portrayed the Colonel. I mean, look, I'll tell you, when I wrote Last Train, Vernon Presley was badmouthed by virtually everyone, by the guys around Elvis, which is understandable. It was even understandable at the time because basically he had no use for most of the guys around Elvis and saw them as kind of, leeching off of Elvis. So you can understand why somebody who wants to get you fired, you might not have that high an opinion of. But the thing I didn't understand, and you would have, where are you from?
Memphis.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sure you have a better understanding than I did. But when I was in Tupelo, I interviewed a number of people who knew the Presleys. And they were all perfectly nice people, and they came from humble circumstances. And every one of them had something bad to say about Vernon. But what I realized afterwards, and I changed it to some extent in the future editions of Last Train, was that they may have come from humble circumstances, but it was from a higher class than the Presleys. And their kids had gone, to Ole Miss. One of them was a fire chief. They went places that Vernon Presley was not going. Vernon Presley, who I think was a very bright man and had a sense of humor similar to his son's, a dry sense of humor anyway. And so their put-downs of Vernon, I think, had as much to do with class, even though to my uneducated eyes, it looked like they were from the same class. Mm-hmm. Now, with Colonel, he was part of the Elvis story. This is not the case. It's not that Elvis is part of the Colonel story here, but this is a portrait of Colonel Parker. This is basically, it's misleadingly titled when it's called The Colonel and the King, but that's life. It had to. It's about Elvis, sure, but it's really about it's Colonel's story, and you see all the familiar events from a different perspective, a different point of view. But if you look at Careless Love, and I don't think I've changed that, and I don't think I would go back. But Colonel was the person who kept the story going. Last Train, the events of Elvis's life are just one of the most inspiring, just thrilling stories. Everything goes right. Everything works out to the fullest extent that Elvis could ever have hoped for, or his mother Gladys could ever hope for. In Careless Love, the external events just don't tell the story. The fact that Elvis is making clam bake or he's making roustabout, it doesn't make much difference. It's fine. And you may like roustabout, but that's not the story. And so I used Colonel Parker in part to keep the story going, and he played almost a Falstaffian role, like Falstaff in Shakespeare, and playing a role in which I'm trying to think what Jack Soden, called him. Admiringly always calls him a lovable scoundrel, and it wasn't that he was a scoundrel, but the machinations and the image that he promoted of himself sort of made the narrative, made the story, it diversified the story. It made it was a way into the story, and I imagined him as that same kind of Falstaffian figure, lovable scoundrel, somebody who rose above it all. But from going into the letters and going into then being tricked into doing the biography, because I came across so much more in talking to his widow, Loanne, and in interviewing other people. I just saw a picture that was quite different from the picture that I had drawn. I'm not disowning it. I'm not, looking for excuses. It's an honest picture, like Careless Love. But what I came across here was a person so full of life, so robust in his humor, but also so vulnerable, so sensitive. And in the end, so susceptible to the same kind of thing that Elvis was, to a gambling addiction, where Elvis was susceptible to this, prescribed medication addiction. And in the end, I came to a conclusion, not that this is the whole story by any means, because Colonel was a life force and to the end of his life. And I mean, just fun. And his whole thing was very much like Sam Phillips. If it ain't fun, it isn't worth doing.
And you got to know him and Loanne really well, right? I mean, you became friends.
We did, but I would say Colonel was not the most open person in the world. And I had a wonderful time fencing with him, and I think that we had a good relationship. It was enjoyable on both parts, but I don't want to build it up into. With Loanne, I came to know Loanne much better in the years after his death, and that was really what gave me a way into, to a more intimate part of his story. That's what I said after I published the Sam Phillips. I was not going to write another biography because it just takes too much out of you. It's total immersion. And this book was supposed to be originally, 30 years ago, a collection of Colonel's letters. But then once I gained entree to all these other insights, Loanne's and other people's too, his nephew, Art von Kirk, the son of his brother, Art A.D., but evidently the D is pronounced like a T in Dutch, or that's what every Dutch person has told me. I just realized that I had to, aside from the letters, which offer a completely different picture of Colonel, I had to tell the story. So I got tricked into doing this. I call it a biographical portrait. So it's not really a biography, but it's 300 pages, so it kind of is.
Yeah, I've got my copy right here that I picked up at Graceland. It's very thick, but I'm so glad you included all the letters.
Mm-hmm. Incredible. Well, that was the whole basis. It was going to be the letters.
Yeah, to read the letters is so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
How much did you edit the letters?
Not much. I mean, you can see by the ellipses, the dots, where Colonel was not above repeating himself, particularly if he was giving instructions about how something was to be done.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't operate on faith very much.
Yeah.
So I would put those in the ellipses. And Colonel wrote kind of like Jack Kerouac, it was stream of consciousness, and it was as if he had what was it Kerouac had, the scroll of teletype paper,
mm-hmm.
and it just, and with Colonel, so look, this is a guy, Andreas Cornelius von Kirk, born in Holland, got through the 4th grade in the Dutch schools. That was the extent of his education. He entered the 5th, I think, but got thrown out of school. Here he is writing in English, his second. He must have been very good at languages because he's writing here in a second language. I think he knew a number of other languages to an extent. Nobody ever detected in 50 years his Dutch origins. I mean, I know that people say, oh, he must have spoken with an accent. There was no accent. But here he is writing in the second language, and he did not believe in punctuation, or he didn't know about punctuation. So many of the sentences just go on and on. He didn't much believe in capitalization, except capitalizing Elvis, all caps, but not the beginning of a sentence necessarily. His syntax was original, and his mode of expression was original. So I write it in some of the letters that I have, or maybe I write in the introduction, that I have put in periods at the end of what is clearly the end of a sentence sometimes. I have sometimes capitalized things. But that's the extent of the editing. I kept his spelling, which is as original as his syntax. So I would hope, there is no typical reader, but I would never tell somebody, oh, look, read it from start to finish. I think that the biography, the 300 pages of biography are, I hope just tell a story that goes on. But I could imagine people jumping around in the letters or delving into them on the basis of their interest. But I think all of the letters that I selected help complement the biography and tell the story, I think, in a slightly different way and illustrate vividly in some cases, particularly to the extent that he reveals his emotions in letters to Elvis and to the person who was really his best friend in the business, Abe Lastfogel, who was the head of William Morris. And you could not have found two more unlikely people to form a best friendship, because Abe Lastfogel was like a legend in show business and the entertainment business. And yet, but again, in their letters together, in Colonel's letters to him and his letters to Elvis and other letters, you see an expression of emotion, an expression of love that came very difficult to. It did not come easily to Colonel.
Well, and you got, I've heard you talk about the party that you got invited to at some point by Colonel Parker, where sort of a lot of the Elvis folks attended. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I mean, this to some extent was an indication of something. I'm not sure. Well, I mean, I'll tell you what it was an indication of. I met Colonel at the Elvis birthday celebration in January of '88, and I went to it. I never went to. I'd never gone before, and I didn't go to another one for a long time. But I just thought, well, all right, Colonel Parker had been exiled from the Elvis world from about '82 to, or maybe 81 or 82, until '88. So, and he was billed as a guest here, and that I'm sure that was due to Jack Soden, who always enjoyed Colonel. Or I would say 99% of the time enjoyed Colonel. Colonel gave him reason on a couple of occasions not to enjoy him.
Yes.
But so Colonel was there, and I thought, all right, I'll never get to talk to him because he doesn't do interviews, and but this is a chance to absorb a little bit of his aura, And but then I was sitting with Sam Phillips and his family. I went with Knox, Sam's son Knox, who was just a wonderful, wonderful friend. And so I'm sitting there with the Phillips family, and Sam says, I'm going to go over and say hello to Tom. I'm not going to call him Colonel. He ain't no damn Colonel. So I trailed along behind him, being the kind of conscientious reporter that I am. I say that very ironically. But I met Colonel there at his table. I mean, and they talked for a minute. Sam had very little regard for Colonel, and maybe, although within a short period of time after Colonel's birthday party a year later, Sam came to have a much higher regard and actually to express the fact that he didn't think anybody else could have taken Elvis to the heights that Elvis achieved. Maybe they weren't the heights that Sam would have liked to have seen him achieve, but in any case, he came to have a much higher regard, and they became pretty good friends. But so I meet Colonel at his table at the thing, and then when I get home, I write to him immediately, and or as soon as I could get his address, I heard back from him. That's when I heard back from him immediately, and he wrote to somebody in the letter section of the book. He says, if I had replied to you any more quickly, you would have had my reply before I got your letter. And that was pretty much my experience. And not long after that, he invited me to his 80th birthday in Las Vegas at the Hilton. And oh my God, I couldn't believe that he did that. I mean, and I don't know why he did it. I can't say. I'd like to say I made such an impression on him, but who knows?
Well, do you think he was thinking maybe you could help him write his autobiography?
No, not at all. I don't think there was. No, I mean, sometimes I think that maybe a friend of mine who worked for him for many, many years, Grayland Landon, put in a good word for me, but I have no idea why he invited me. And at the end of it was just, everybody was there. Everybody in the Elvis world, or everybody behind the scenes in the Elvis world, so at the end of the evening, I go up to thank him, and he's sitting in front of a carved ice elephant, or an elephant carved in ice. Maybe there was two elephants. It's a picture in the book. And he's talking with Sam Phillips, and the two of them are going back and forth. This is where I think Sam's view of Colonel changed. They're going back and forth, talking about, I don't want to say arguing, but discussing the events in the most precise detail that took place in the 2 weeks prior to Sam selling Elvis's contract to RCA in November of '55. And they're arguing on the basis, this is micro discussion. They're talking on the basis not of years, not of months, not of weeks, not of days, not of hours, but of minutes. I mean, they're coming down to, and they didn't agree on everything, but each of them had the most precise recollection and grasp of every single detail. And they were enjoying the hell out of it. And Sam said, man, you got to join us for breakfast tomorrow when we pick up this discussion again. And I almost killed myself because I had to get a red eye home. I just had no choice in the matter. And but I then introduced myself to Colonel. I mean, there was a break. And I said, I'm Peter Guralnick, and I just want to thank you for inviting me to your party. I really appreciate it. he says, and his voice had lowered at that point to some extent, and he was somewhat guttural, still no accent, but guttural. And he says, I put you on the list. And I thought, well, sometimes I kid with Alexandra about, well, it doesn't matter. But I thought, well, he didn't really understand what I was saying. So I said, well, listen, I mean, not listen, but I said, Colonel Parker, I just really appreciate you inviting me. I just wanted to thank you. He says, I put you on the list. And I said, okay, we're stuck here. By the third time he said, I put you on the list, I realized what he was saying. He had put me on the list. And that meant that I had met all these people. I didn't introduce myself as someone who was working on a biography of Elvis. I mean, I'm not that ill-bred or anything. I wasn't going to break into a birthday celebration. But I had met all these people who had, like Tom Hewlett, who was really the key figure in terms of working with Colonel to book Elvis on all those 70s tours. He's the guy who had the knowledge, he had the information, he knew everything, and he and Colonel together were an unbeatable team. But so all of these people I'm not as indefatigable a letter writer as Colonel Parker. He was truly indefatigable. I mean, there must be tens of thousands of letters in that collection. And maybe if I say tens of thousands, maybe it was thousands. But no, I think it's tens of thousands. But I wrote to every single one of the people I met, and nearly every one of them agreed to be interviewed by me. And there's no question in my mind that many of them would never have agreed if they hadn't seen that Colonel had put his imprimatur on me by putting me on the list, by inviting me to the party. And I think Colonel liked me. And in later years, Loanne would say to me, Colonel came so close to just opening up to you, to letting you interview him in a way. But I honestly don't know if that, I mean, I'd like to think that's true, but, people say nice things to you, and it doesn't mean they're insincere, but that may have been a polite thing. We were friends, Loanne and I, and that was a very nice thing for him to say. And he always drew back he never did it. I mean, he wrote to me sometimes, and he would say, I'd like to tell you more, but if I told you more, if I helped you out here, then I'd have to help out all my other writer friends, and so I can't just select you. Then he would go ahead and help me in a way that he said he couldn't. But in any case, so I'd like to think, I think you present yourself to people as yourself. I mean, if there are any people thinking about writing or interviewing or something, people sometimes say to me, oh, you must be such a great interviewer. And I'm not. I'm just, I'm interested, and I try to be as well informed as I can. But I don't have not only do I not have any tricks, I think I'm pretty awkward. But I do think that I can convey, I think most people I talk to know that I care about what I'm asking about and that I care about them. And so I'd like to think Colonel felt that and also felt that I think he enjoyed it's not repartee when you go back and forth in letter writing, but he really enjoyed the back and forth. And so we did that, and it was good. And so that may have been, but why he invited me to the party, I don't know.
Well, and you've been blessed to be in those situations where you could have been a fan, and you would have been thrown out almost immediately.
Yeah.
But you just did, you were quiet and you listened, and people could feel your sincerity. And I'm sure Jerry Schilling might have even been, at that party, but all those guys.
He was, and we met shortly afterwards on the set of the Young Elvis that he was producing. And again, and he's been the best of friends ever since, but it was based on, well, he's just such a person of such sincerity.
Oh, he's such a great guy. And, I've been fortunate. Zach, I know you're an Elvis fan. But I've been fortunate to be that quiet person on like Elvis cruises and Elvis week. And, and I just keep my mouth shut and do my job and listen, because to be honored enough to sit there and listen to these icons discussing their time with Elvis is just mind blowing,
Yeah. I don't know if I could do what you do though. I mean, I'm not good at I don't think I could go on a cruise or, and the only thing that really gets me in the door and that makes me feel comfortable getting in the door is that I have a purpose to it. I mean, many of these people like Charlie Rich or Solomon Burke, I became, or Sleepy LaBeef, I became good friends with. But what got me in the door, what gives me the confidence to go in the door is that I have a purpose being there. But I'll tell you, just in terms of interviewing, and I know this is way off the subject as far as, but I'll never forget second or third time I met Merle Haggard, and Merle could be subject to fairly bleak or black moods, and could be a little. He was not an up kind of guy, although he was a genius and somebody I admired enormously. But I remember we were in Meridian for the Jimmy Rogers Festival, and I'm interviewing him. He's got all these little dogs yapping in this hotel room, and they were all kind. No, it was in the restaurant actually, motel restaurant. It was the worst kind of situation for doing an interview, and you just accept whatever it is. But I thought I had a good question to ask him, which was not why are you so great or but who had influenced him as a songwriter. And, essentially I framed it by saying, well, you're such a great songwriter. You must have had people you looked up to as a songwriter. Was there anybody, whose songs taught you or, you modeled? And at that point, there was a silence, and I go like 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, I go like that now to indicate that all these, and I'm waiting, and finally he says, "Nope." Was there anyone who influenced you? Nope. But the point was, so what? So he said that. Am I going to take that as an insult? You can't talk to me like that, which sometimes I run into people who say, well, I've got my dignity. And when I have my dignity, I'm not going to be treated, in the way that we watch people being treated publicly in public places now lately. But the point is, this is his choice. This is his choice. And after he said nope, and he's looking, he then went on to describe at great length the source of some of his songs, the inspirations for some of his songs, which songs he liked, who were writers that he admired beyond Lefty Frizzell and stuff. So I just feel like, you're there. I'm there because of him. He's not there because of me. He doesn't know me anything, nor did any of the people I interviewed about Elvis. They didn't know me a thing. But what I appreciate so much about the contact I've had, let's say Al Dvorak, he was just great. And he's the guy who originally hired Tom Diskin before Tom Diskin went to work for Colonel Parker. But in any case, I just appreciate so much the opportunity to meet these people and then to have them explain. And when Al Dvorak tells me about the business he ran before he met Colonel, which was way, way back that he met him, and how, Tom Diskin could organize all the pencils on his desk and stuff when Tom Diskin, Colonel's principal associate, when he got out of the Navy, I think, maybe Army, and how Al Dvorak and Tom Diskin had gone to high school together. None of this has anything to do really with what you're writing, yet it has everything to do with trying to understand the people you're talking to and what they witness to.
Man, this is so amazing to me that I almost don't want to stop for the break, but we're going to, and we're going to be right back.
Based here in Union City, Tennessee, Vaughn Electric Company is a fourth-generation family-owned business specializing in commercial and industrial electrical services. If you are looking for electrical services of all kinds, look no further than Vaughn Electric, the official electric company of Discovery Park of America. For more information, visit vaughnelectric.com.
I hope you're enjoying the Real Foot Forward podcast from Discovery Park of America. If you are, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a positive review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Our guest today is Peter Guralnick, and we're talking about all things Colonel Parker and Elvis. Talking to you right now, I'm thinking back to people like Joe Gershio and Joe Esposito and Dixie, Locke Emmons, and all these Elvis people.
Dixie was so wonderful.
I loved Dixie. Yeah, she was great. I'll tell you a really quick story. Dixie and I went to church together, and this is long ago at First
Assembly of God.
Yeah, First Assembly of God. We went to church together, and I was a college student.
This was when it was out.
Highland. Was on Highland at that time.
On Highland. Yeah. I mean, it moved out of South Memphis.
And she she was the church secretary,
Yeah.
and people whispered that she dated Elvis. And so, but they said, don't ask her about it. She didn't talk about it. And so I'm a college student, and they asked me to do some art for a project they were doing. Dixie asked me, and I said, Dixie, I'll do it on one account. Will you tell me about when you dated Elvis? And so she said, I'll do it. And so this is long before I worked there, but she told me the whole story, and what a sweet, wonderful person she was.
Well, the way I came to Dixie was doing no interviews. She thought that the interview with me was the first interview she did, which I don't think is true. I think she may have done one or two before. And it's not, there's no pride of place in it. But the reason she did the interview with me was that I was out at James Blackwood's house, which was quite close to Highland, and interviewing him. And it was a wonderful interview. It was just a whole education in quartet singing, which I didn't know much about. And he was so generous and it was so interesting. And he was talking about the Soul Stirrers and Sister Rosetta Tharpe, or maybe not Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Dorothy Love Coates, and how they had influenced it was stuff I would never have imagined. And I mentioned Dixie. I guess he says, "Oh, she's over there working at First Assembly, and would you like me to give her a call?" And I said, "Well, sure, that'd be great." I had tried fruitlessly to get together with her before that, and he calls her up and tells her, I've got this. I might have been a young man then, but whatever. I was middle-aged man. I think I was young, but and he says, I'd really appreciate it if you talked to him. And I went right over from there to the church, and we talked down there in the church basement where maybe she didn't work there, but we went down there to a meeting room in there. And it was just the most remarkable thing. It was incredible. It was one of the most emotional interviews I've ever done. And at the end of it, I felt like I slunk away as if I'd done something bad. And she was, it wasn't, again, it has nothing to do with me. It had to do with her willingness and her, just like when she talked to you, she wanted to talk about it, but she talked about it in a way that drew a lot out of her. It wasn't easy for her. And I remember I went back one other time, and it's funny, I would have loved to have been friendly with Dixie, but it was almost like I felt, and her husband, I think, did not want her to be known as Elvis Presley's girlfriend.
Correct. Understandably.
Yeah, understandably. So anyway, Dixie was just wonderful, and it's an interesting thing about, I met so many of Elvis's girlfriends over the years, and they were all extreme. I mean, June Juanico, it just was amazing.
June's great. Linda's great.
Linda's great, but even somebody like Sheila Khan. Sheila Khan, I think so.
Yeah. Yep.
She was.
I think about all these Elvis weeks. Dixie, I was only there 12 years, but Dixie, her first appearance at an Elvis week was with me inviting her. So I was proud of that and wanted to make sure that she had a great experience, a positive experience. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on the whole Elvis subculture, the whole Elvis world? Do you have any? You've been to so many of the events and met so many.
I haven't been to so many of the events. I've been to really a handful, I would say.
Really?
I've enjoyed it very much.
Yeah.
But no, I don't have any overarching view. I was going to say about all of these girlfriends was that every one of them was bright, every one of them was engaging, and every one of them was completely different.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. That's true.
And although the girlfriends is the best word I can come up with, but the experience of the girlfriends at the end really said something kind of sad about Elvis and they were more. What do you call it? Caregivers, and they were girlfriends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But no, I feel like the Elvis community it's like any other community in which people come together and they find a commonality. They make friends. I mean, when I was signing books at Graceland this past week or the week before, all these people who had met in line, they were taking selfies. I mean. They weren't selfies but the people behind them were taking the pictures. But it was a long line, so they had learned something about each other, and they were planning to get together again, or whether it was on social media or nobody goes on the phone anymore. I like to talk on the phone, but nobody does. But no, I feel like that's what it is, and I think it's been a much misunderstood phenomenon. But again, I think it's as much class as anything else, where people look down. I don't see a difference between this and it's not a community that I would be naturally a part of. I mean, not because I'm above it, not because of anything. Maybe because I'm too withdrawn to it.
Sure. That makes total sense. I've always found that to me, that was my favorite part of working there was the community of people that came together. You know, there's two Gracelands and really kind of two Elvises, and in August and in January is when the hardcore fans come together, and they could be a doctor, a housekeeper, it could be all these different, like you said, and they just get to know each other. And then every single time you come together, it's old fans seeing each other and, old friends. And it's just a fun experience.
And it's Elvis who's drawn them together. And I feel like the media and, as Bobby Bill Bland talked about the high class joints and the low class joints, the people from the high class joints sort of look down on this. But really what's brought them together, it's not a cult. It's something in which they have something in common. It's Elvis's music that has brought them together, and I don't want to overly romanticize it, but I just have felt I've enjoyed. It's not just I've enjoyed it. I just feel like it's wonderful that people can find something like that does bring them together, and that's really, this is not a profound statement, and I'm not trying to make the statement as some kind of an expert or somebody who, but I feel like I've seen so much snooty reactions to the Elvis world, and I do not share in that at all. I think it's wrong, and I think it's people who don't want to take the trouble to look at the individuals, because they are all individuals. And the people that I've met, and I've met so many different people over the years, they all have their own perspectives, they all have their own points of view, and yet they come together they come together over this one thing, this one thing they have in common, and it means a lot.
Yeah. So last question, you've donated a lot of your research to the Southern Folklife collection of the Wilson Library at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. What all did you donate? I mean, you've had a career that is incredible. You've got so much materials. What was that like going through, and what all did you donate?
Pretty much everything. I mean, I'm a bad donator in one sense. Steve Weiss is the curator of that Southern Folklife, and he's an incredible person. I think we spent 3 or 4 years talking about it, and other people had come to me about donating my archive or whatever. And so, there are tape recordings of interviews for all of the books. There are transcripts of interviews. Wow. There are all the novels I've written. There are the drafts of the novels. There are drafts of the books. Most of this is not for the everyday visitor, and in some ways, in any case, most, but there's a lot of basic, material that I think could be helpful to people in doing research. And so it's really a lot. But what happened was, whenever we made the final agreement, it has to be more than 15 years ago. And I think what Steve Weiss and I envisioned was that I would turn over everything within 10 years or something. But I couldn't, because I continued to work on all these things. I was working on the Sam Phillips, then I was working on Looking to Get Lost, my last book. Then I'm working. So it's not that I like to think that I've that my archive is sort of like Colonel's archive. It's pretty complete. It's a lot of stuff, but University of North Carolina may have duplicates of most of the stuff, but I have held on to it. It's just a fraction of what I had, but I'm glad I did, because it wasn't that I was planning to write this Colonel book when I did, but I thought, well, I can't send back this now. I can't, And I continue to work. I've always continued to work on. I'm no less interested in Muddy Waters now than I was when I first wrote about him in 1969 or 70. And so I keep up with, if there are developments. Robert Gordon wrote his wonderful biography, Can't Be Satisfied. But I keep up with research. When new editions of the books come out, I try to bring them up to date, not by rewriting them extensively, but by at least correcting either misstatements or or just confusions of perspective, let's say. So anyway, so I've still got a lot of stuff because I'm still working, and
that's good. Keep working. There's a lot more stories to tell.
Well, my father kept working until he was almost 101, as a doctor, until he diagnosed himself as having congestive heart failure 2 weeks before he died. He said, "Okay, that's it. I'm checking out." He did. But he was working right up until that time. He had cut back on. He was only working 4 days a week then.
But you can keep working 4 days a week for 20, 30 more years.
He wasn't sure that this was that this age was meant, this length of time was meant for people. That it was, but there he was. He was, and he was working, and he was enjoying it, and so. I can't conceive of, I can conceive of circumstances preventing me from working, health circumstances or whatever, but I can't conceive of why I would want to stop working, because this is what I love, and it's, I don't love it any less now. I'm no less enthusiastic about it.
Are you almost done with your, how long does the promotion last for a book like this? I heard you on Fresh Air with Terry Gross. I've been seeing you and hearing you here and there. Are you getting close to the light at the end of the tunnel for the promotional part?
Not really. No, I've been doing this with my son and daughter, Jake and Nina, and with Nina's daughter, Anastasia. We've been working, well, basically with Jake and Nina. And we didn't see the promotion as being something that you wanted to stack up all at the beginning or anything like that. And so we've tried to create events to continue to do things on, and to do things over a period of time. So, for instance, in I think 2 weeks from, I think it's 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, I'm doing a thing in Brooklyn with Elvis Costello where he'll interview me. Then I'm doing a thing at Americana in Nashville, and I'm doing another thing, a television shoot. Which I hope will happen. I'm just going to go.
Are you doing any international? The international fans are love books.
I don't think so, and it's not because I have a manager who's Dutch. No, I would do it, but things have changed. Things have really tightened up in publishing, and whereas when Last Train and Careless Love came out, or maybe it was I think both, but at least Careless Love, the English publisher immediately said, "You've got to come over here," and we did some really big events. And but I don't think there's, let's call me we're being generous, a mid-level author, not a big bestseller, and I don't think there's the budget for that kind of thing. And somebody said, somebody from Holland said, "We'd love to have you come over," and I said, "Well, okay, that'll be great." But then I said, "Well, but if I came over, I'd want to come over with my wife and with Alexandra and this and that." And we couldn't do it. And that's okay. I'm not blaming them, but I just
your entourage. You need
yeah, no, not my entourage. But I just don't want. I don't want to do it to be. I want to do. I'd love to do it. There's been a lot of interest in the book in Holland, and some slight interest maybe in publishing the book in Dutch, but I don't think they will, because for one thing, it's a long book, which means a big, it's a big translated job. And for another thing, most people in Holland read English. But still, there have been a bunch of big stories in Holland, and so that's cool.
Well, I was in the back of the room when you were at your Elvis Week event recently watching, and I was curious how the fans were going to, approach. But they were they loved it. You got lots of applause, and, Tom Brown led you through, a great interview. And, so the response I felt like was very favorable.
Well, I think Tom Brown turned the room around. And I mean, I think a lot of people came with a great deal of skepticism, let's say. And Tom Brown framed the interview he did with me, which, again, he's a great interviewer. And I hope, I came a little close, to matching him. But it
was great. No, it was a great. You didn't have on as bright of a colored outfit, but.
Well, he's from Tupelo,
That's right.
But no, I mean, the point was he framed it by saying, hey, we're all here because we love Elvis. And because we love Elvis, we want to know the truth about Elvis. We want to know that we want to tell the true story. And Peter has done this or that, and and I know this what he's writing here goes against a lot of it goes against preconceptions a lot of you may have. But if you read the book, you will. And I think he just essentially turned, what could have been a very, if not hostile, indifferent crowd around. And that's what many of the people who came for the signings over the next 2 days said. So yeah, I give all credit to Tom Brown and appreciate it so much. I can't believe. I said to you, people say to me sometimes, you must be a good interviewer. Tom Brown is a great interviewer. Mm-hmm. I'm not on that level. Anyway, close.
He does a great job, but it was a great subject, and you were a great interview. So I know he appreciated having you there. And I know all the Elvis fans and Jen and all the people behind the scenes, Carla, I know they all appreciated having you there too. And Alicia and I were texting back and forth while you were up there. So
I thought somebody wasn't paying attention. No, well, I and you mentioned my, being there a lot. These are people that I've known for many years. Your former boss,
mm-hmm.
whose name I'm forgetting again now.
Well, there was at Graceland
in marketing, and
Todd Morgan and I worked together, but Jack was my boss.
Okay, well, I was thinking of the woman from St. Louis.
Jen
St. Louis.
Jen.
No, the woman from St. Louis, Carol Butler.
Oh, Carol Butler.
Maybe she wasn't your boss. Anyway, the point is, I've known a lot of these people in archives and everywhere else.
Yeah.
And I've just really treasured and appreciated, knowing them, working with them on so many different projects over the years. And it's been a unique, there was somebody there who had been in archives when Alexander and I first went there in 95. And she's not working there anymore, but she introduced herself, and it was great to see her, and I signed a book for her.
Yeah, it might have been LaVon Gall.
That's who it was. Yeah, it was LaVon.
Yeah, it was LaVon Gall. So yeah, no, it is a magical place. People who just visit there, and it's magical for them too. But for those of us that were blessed to be able to have even a smidgen of time behind the scenes, nobody walks away untouched. It really is a magical place. So I appreciate you getting Colonel Parker's story down and giving us another aspect of him, because he really was my favorite character of the whole Elvis story, and he was the one that I was hopeful that you would write the book about. So thank you so much.
Well, listen, thanks. This has been I'm going to say, being charitable towards myself, this has been a wide-ranging influence, but you've got to recognize that when I taught creative writing at Vanderbilt over those 12 years, I would tell every class, prize the digression. So I hope I've done more than provide digressions. I hope there's been something useful in here.
Absolutely. There definitely is. And thank you for taking your time. I know you're a busy guy, so thank you for talking to us.
No, it's great. It's great talking. It's great seeing you again, Scott.
And thanks to all you listeners who joined us today at Discovery Park of America. Shout out to our friends over at Vaughn Electric for sponsoring today's episode. Our mission here at Discovery Park is to inspire children and adults to see beyond. To plan an experience here for you and your family, visit discoveryparkofamerica.com.